Welcome, students. Today we're going to be talking about curse tablets and cursing tablets. So the interesting thing here is we have a whole material archive of these. We're not just looking at literature. We do have spells in the Greek magical papyri that explain the recipes for how to make these things, but we physically have them. I remember I was in India one time and I was meeting with a man named Professor Mark Dyczkowski. He's like one of my favorites, great scholar of Tantra. And we were talking about different magical rituals. And I was telling him about one where he took the wing of a crow and the wing of an owl and tied them together with blue thread and slipped a mantra in that had the name of two different people who were intimate. But by virtue of this ritual, they would become hostile. Why? Because crows and owls hate each other. And he said, "Oh, Aaron, I have something to tell you. I was walking on Asigat the other day, a place in the city where he lives, Benares, and he found on the ground at a crossroads, even the wings of a crow, the wings of an owl, blue thread, and he pulled and there was a mantra in it, but it was all written in Arabic script, so he couldn't read it. So kind of exciting. Anyway, so we have these physical items. We have these curse tablets, and we can look at them. We can read them. We can discern them. So let's get into them. I mean, sometimes people will say that this is like the main aspect, or maybe it's like the thing that is thought of the most when somebody thinks about like Greek magic and Greco-Roman magic. They think about these curse tablets. So they bear looking at. Okay, curse tablets are called defixio or defixiones in the plural. And they're used for a wide range of sort of personal development and for also harming people. And sometimes you personally enrich yourself by harming others. It's a magical world after all. So Farone did not treat the curse rituals in his book, and he didn't do it explicitly because these curse tablets actually come quite a bit later than the stuff that he was looking at. Remember that in Farone, it's very much DIY, like you're doing it yourself, as opposed to like hiring a sorcerer who you'll function as a client as to do the magic for someone else. So, we've found 1,700 of these physical tablets that have been studied and translated and published. And as Radcliffe Edmonds notes, there's going to be more of them. They keep finding them. So we will keep unearthing these because they're often made of lead, and we continue to find them. So it's a continuity. And in fact, in a way, when we find these curse rituals, we actually can hear the voices of people from thousands of years ago. People that never would have written a text or have talked to somebody that would have written a Latin or Greek text. And here they are, their hopes, their desires, their pains, and their wishes are right here on these tablets. So they're really interesting to me in the fact that they preserve voices you wouldn't usually see. Now, Edmonds is going to focus once again in his treatment, and this is why I really like his treatment, on not as much on what the texts are, as in what they do, or when they were constructed, or when they were deposited or deployed, but he's really going to ask who was using these rituals and for what reason. Now, if you want to have more details about these actual specific texts, what's going on in them, what, where, when, then those are well documented. And you can look up articles by philologists, people that study language, classicists, those who study Greek and Roman, and archaeologists who have dug up and studied these things. You can go and look at these specific details, but Radcliffe Edmonds is really trying to get you to have an overall understanding of context without getting lost in the data. So we need to ask ourselves, what do these artifacts that we found reveal about magic and about the social situations affected by magic and those who use magic? So what are these things? Well, they're described as a thin sheet called a lamella with writing upon them. Well, let's do a little etymology. Off to the OED. What is lamella? From 1678, we actually find a definition that says a thin plate. This is in the Oxford English Dictionary. A thin plate, scale, layer, or film, especially of bone or tissue. One of the thin scales or plates which compose some shells. One of gills forming in the hymenium of a mushroom. One of the erect scales appended to the corollas of some flowers. So there's a botanical argument here. And we also have that word laminate, as in to put something between two pieces of plastic. So the diminutive of this, so the little version of it, like if I was to say, look at that horse and look at horsiekins over there, Or look at that pup, and look at that puppy. I don't know. Anyway, so it's a diminutive form of the term lamina. Now, what is lamina? We go back even further. 1489, we read that a lamina is a thin plate or a layer of metal or something else. It's a plate of metal that was used actually as an astrological instrument or a charm. So a lamina would be, you would put like, you put a symbol for an astrological deity, and then you would carry it around. Like I have a friend who has a little lamina of the god Jupiter because he loves the god Jupiter and the planet Jupiter, and he carries it in his wallet. And his point is Jupiter oversees prosperity, so he wants Jupiter to be looking over his wallet. So from there, we can actually step into something even more vast when it comes to magic. Now, in contemporary esoteric worlds, they have a thing called a lamen. Now, a lamen is used as a sort of magic heraldry, like a symbol for a magical order or a magical person. Aleister Crowley wrote that a lamina is a sort of coat of arms. It expressed the sort of character and the powers of the wearer. And other thinkers think about contemporary esoteric stuff, talk about these symbol systems as being extension of the priestly breastplates that Hebrews would wear. And if you look at old sort of depictions of rabbis and the priests and the Levites who would do the rituals in the old temples in Judaism, you'll see that they always had these jeweled, signified, like written upon breastplates. So I've got three lamens right here. On the left, you'll see the lamen of the contemporary order called the OTO, which I'm a little affiliated with. And this is a symbol that you will see that people wear as a necklace. A lot of people wear it on a ring. I have a patch over there somewhere that I need to sew onto a leather jacket or a denim jacket, probably for me. I ain't fancy. So these represent sort of the essence of a magical order. So on the left, what you're seeing is the vision of Gnostic wisdom descending and the bird dropping down into humanity. In the center, you see the rosy cross. You'll see all sorts of business in there, different pentagrams. You'll see a hexagram. You'll see INRI, which is a mystical formula that you may also be used to seeing atop Catholic depictions of the crucifixion. It's like INRI. A friend of mine used to always joke, you know what INRI means? He's from Calcutta. He said, I nearly reached India. I've always liked that line. So there's a lot of symbolic coding in this symbol that stands almost like your heraldry, almost like the like when I say heraldry, I mean, if you think in the like early Western culture, you would have symbols that would signify a family, or there were heraldry for all of the apostles. Like one had, like Judas had 40 pieces of silver, and then other symbols. So symbolic representations of people. On the right, you'll see the lamen designed by John Dee, who is a man who created the Enochian language once upon a time. You may have heard of Enochian. It's a synthetic language designed by, that is supposedly the language of the angels. And this was something he would use as a charm and also as a symbol for himself. All right. So what are the role of these curse tablets that also have this element of, they're skinny little metal things with writing on them. They're not doing all that I said with lamen there in the heraldry. They're skinny little magic ritual implements. Well, we read from Radcliffe Edmonds about how one sort of mystical figure, who is in fact yet another one of these Thessalonian witches, Thessalos was famous for witches, who had these lamella, these curse tablets, amongst her stock. First, she arranged her deadly laboratory. Okay, I like deadly laboratory. With its customary apparatus, setting out spices of all sorts, unintelligibly lettered metal plates. That's what we're talking about here. The surviving remains of illum and birds, and numerous pieces of mourned and even buried corpses. Here noses and fingers, there flesh-covered spikes from crucified bodies. Elsewhere, the preserved gore of murder victims and mutilated skulls wrenched from the teeth of wild beasts. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit later in this lecture about a coefficient of weirdness. When you are describing people to do magic, they're described as weird. And their weirdness is part of it. It's the weirdness that gives them power. So in this depiction of a famous witch, we see that she does all sorts of creepy things, but she also has these curse tablets. Now, these were ubiquitous. They were everywhere. So Plato actually describes these binding curses called katodesmoi, and they were used to be used against the just and the unjust. They were used to bind, we'll talk about this more, binding a rival or an enemy. Now, Plato was writing 300 to 400 BCE. We find these materials all over the place and can date them much later. And then in the Greek magical papyri, which because of their original Latin naming is we go by PGM. I know, it's fine. The Greek magical papyri date from the 2nd to 4th century CE. So we can just set out right here, roughly 800 years of these things being used. And we find troves of them even in Britain, where the Romans had held England for quite some time. In fact, in the city of Bath, we read about a whole giant trove of these cursing spells and figures. So the Greek magical papyri, like I was saying, show these rituals and recipes to actually make these types of curse tablets. Now, the Greek magical papyri, remember, are not Hellenic; they're Hellenistic, so they're Egyptian, they're Greco-Roman. These are written, they are inscribed, they use the names of people. So this is important when we're looking at them. People are named. The person who made them knew how to write. They were literate. Writing itself is a magical act, and we find this in quite a number of cultures that we're going to see. So this suggests that the people who are using these and making these rituals were actually literate, were actually learned, possibly in multiple languages, and the ability to write. The operators, these performers of rituals, would obviously also chant and perform other rituals in addition to the writing. So they would do offerings and make incantations and whatnot in addition to inscribing. But the inscription is very important. The simplest form of inscription is just the name of a target, victim, perhaps with a verb of binding. But some of the later examples contain lengthy and complex texts. The curse's action upon the target is described in a variety of ways, as binding or binding down the target. So this katodesmoi was right here, defixiare or legare, and Latin meaning like to bind, to ligature. As register, so the target is described as having a couple of things. One, as being bound and bound down. Also, we see another element of the ritual, which is registering and writing down the name of the target. The target is named. Also, dedicating the target or dedicating the ritual to some sort of deity, dedicare, devotare. Sometimes a drawing is added to the text. The image could be an effigy of the person, or the image itself could be part of the ritual. It's not the person, it's that image does something. What's important to see here is 3 common elements in these curse tablets. 1, a verb of the result, binding the target, the name of the target, and 3, some superhuman power that will affect this. And as we'll see in a second, sometimes that superhuman power is the ritual itself and the words of the ritual. So how are these darn things deployed? Where do we find them? So they could be rolled up and deposited in all sorts of places. They're often found in graves. They're often found in wells. They would often be pierced by a nail. So you would make this like metal thing, like look to your left here. You can see that metal thing that's unrolled. Now you look to the right, that's where they found that thing. It was in a grave. So if it's pierced, if they roll up the metal thing and stick a nail through it, and they talk about specifically nails from shipwrecks being important there, that really gives a sense of the curse is you're taking the metal plate that tells you the curse that binds, and you're piercing it to bind it further. The spell binds, and you're binding the spell item itself, which is kind of cool. There are some other references in these recipes to knots and strings, as in like you tie up the lead thing after you fold it. All of this has elements of binding. Now, we do also see these sort of voodoo type dolls that we're going to see all over magical traditions, because I think there is something in our cognition. There's something about the human brain that says, I want to make a doll of somebody and do something horrible to it to make it happen. That, I think that's in our cognitive structure somewhere, which is why it's so universal. So we do find these voodoo type dolls at crossroads, usually at crossroads. Now, these figurines were not necessarily an effigy of the target. It's more like, it's like the less well they're rendered, the fewer details, you get the sense that they're more effective that way, the vaguer they are. In this sense, the image might not be an effigy. The image itself might be a thing that is doing something, be an implement in the ritual. Graves and wells were the most common places. But what you need to remember is these things are secret. They're deposited somewhere where they radiate malevolence. They're not publicly declared. So why curse tablets? What's this social world of magic? And this is what I want you to think about. Is history a mirror? Do I look back in time and do I see a perfect reflection of the world? Or do I see a reflection of the world there? Or is history a window and I see the world accurately? I would argue that history doesn't have like a window where you can clearly see the past. What you can see is different reflections and refractions of the past through the material you look at. So the results and reasons for doing these rituals reveal a social context of magic ritual and the world of magic rituals. And there's some argument that Edmonds makes about some rituals affect the present, something that's going on right now, or something going on in the future. Now, if you have a curse that is supposed to affect the future, it would be considered most powerful if the curse never comes underway. If the curse never happens to someone, that means the curse really worked. Now, we should also remember that erotic magic, eros magic, comes out of this culture of cursing. Now, there is some discussion of self-cursing in which someone says something like, I will fade away, I will be unable to eat unless I keep my word. Here you're making like a public statement with magical implication, a sort of magical vow, which would be public. It wouldn't be private and secret and squirreled away like with the curse tablets. So if you have a ritual affecting the present as opposed to the future, then it would be very specific. And we have to remember that Greek life was agonistic. What do I mean by agonistic? I mean, it's rivals, it's success, it's failure. Your success is the failure of another. Agonism, according to the OED, says strenuous struggling, competing for a prize, also a strenuous struggle, a combat, a competition. Beating your rivals in Greece is a sort of public sport. There is an agonistic world of these cursed tablets, giving voices to the fears of the individuals and the anxieties of individuals trying to deal in this competitive world of chariot racing and public debates, trying to win and being very anxious about it. And intriguingly, as I said before, we hear their voices recorded in these little cursed tablets. Their voices stretch to us now, and we can hear them. Now, I wrote the agonistic world of sacrifice. Well, in India, in the Vedic period, which is very, very early, you would see that sacrifice was a battle. One Brahmin would sacrifice in one area, doing a dramatic ritual, and another one on another hill would be doing another ritual. And they would be competing to see who could do it the best. And the one who could do it the best would get the most favor of the gods and the most patronage to their ritual sponsors. So why am I saying this? Because anytime I think about agonism, I think about that agonistic world of sacrifice. So I talked about presence being very specific, the future being sort of more general, and self-cursing, beating rituals, or beating rivals as public sport. We also see evidence of rituals being used as justice for theft. Say, may this person waste away because they took my what and what and what. One thing is that these competitive curses against someone in the present are rarely murderous. They don't kill. So one thing we need to think about is, were the people doing these rituals just crazy, violent people that enjoyed violent imagery and enjoyed talking about doing horrible things to other people? Or was there something else going on? And I would argue there's something else going on. In all of these cases, the violence that is described is not merely an outlet for the sadistic malevolence of the agent, of the operator. The fact that these tablets were ritually inscribed and carefully prepared indicates that it is a carefully considered symbolic gesture rather than an uncontrollable emotional venting. It's not just releasing your frustration. Often, too, it is clear that the tablet was actually created by someone other than the person who wanted it to be done. There are presence of formulaic patterns of cursing indicates the activity of professional experts. So in the Greek magical papyri, when you have a ritual recipe and it says put so-and-so's name here and so-and-so's name here, that means a professional was probably like, all right, I'm consulting this, and I'm gonna do my curse tablet, and I put it here and here and here. So the key here is to note that this isn't just acting out violent impulses. These rituals were thought to do something, namely to give you an edge in this agonistic social world. So how do these rituals work, or maybe not work? We know that they were considered effective because Greeks and Romans used them for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and all over the world. I mean, we find them everywhere from in what is now Greece to what is now Britain. We know the rituals were effective because they were actually connected to or enlivened by a superhuman power. In part of the ritual, it will say a deity or the power of the words or the magic tablet itself will cause the effect to happen. It's more than just a human agency. When you make the tablet, you're drawing into a power greater than the individual human being. Now, it's more than a normal human being could do. And this pattern is important. We see this throughout ritual magic. Sometimes a god is coerced. Sometimes a god is asked. Sometimes it pulls upon a ghost or a spirit to do the violence of the magic. And sometimes the superhuman power is just the inherent power of the ritual itself. So fundamentally, a curse is an efficacious wish for someone else's harm. Where's this one? In all these cases, the violence. I already said that. Anyway, okay, I have a quote that didn't get up there. Sorry. So fundamentally, a curse is an efficacious wish for someone else's harm, an expression of violence and malevolence, ill wishing, and it produces a desired effect. Now, since it is not within the power of a normal human being to instantaneously bring their wishes to fruition, some extraordinary power is required. That power may not be explained or even named within the text itself. One of the big things that we find throughout cultures is that aggressive magic is connected to malevolence and cursing. One common thing is the evil eye. Now, I'm going to talk in a minute a little bit about how the evil eye is a common instance also found in South Asia. The evil eye is sort of ubiquitous in the Mediterranean culture and kind of far beyond. The evil eye is sort of like a curse using the gaze, your very gaze of your eye as magic. So Edmonds describes the so-called evil eye as the simplest form of cursing, consisting merely of the envious glance at the target without even a verbalized wish. Plutarch and his companions debate the nature and causes of the evil eye in one of Plutarch's table talk dialogues, coming up with a variety of explanations for this phenomenon, but they are all grounded in the idea that it is caused by envy, that feeling that someone else is doing better than oneself, and the subsequent wish to reverse that situation. The jealousy causes the evil eye to be cast, and the evil eye cast upon person, the curse, the hex, causes them to be less successful, to be cursed in life. So the rationalizing philosopher Plutarch comes up with an explanation that involves beams coming from the eyes that are generated by internal feelings of envy, producing evil within the soul. Internal feelings of envy and evil in the soul shoot out through the eyes. These rays of malevolence may further be explained by Democritian, I'm not going to go into that, theories of images, idola, that pass from one eye to another and create harm in the receiver. But it is the feeling of envy that creates the power. The effects of the evil eye, Bascania, may be diverted by bizarre evil eye protections and counter magic that literally distract the gaze, especially phallic amulets or images of the ejaculating phallus, or even phallic gestures or ejaculatory spitting. Think about in Greek depictions, popular depictions of Greek culture when people spit upon one another. The thought is that that spitting kind of mirrors ejaculatory whatnot and phallic stuff and casts aside the evil eye. Why do I bring all this up? Well, various reasons. In India, there's the same simple idea when it comes to vision. So when I look at something, when any of my senses go out into the world, they physically go out. My eye vision goes out and it looks at a ball. Then that eye vision alters looking at that ball and then comes back into my head and like touches my brain that interprets it. So in this way, if I look out and I have the eyes of jealousy, I will actually touch a person with my eyes and I can put the evil in them. Or let's say I'm looking at someone who's wearing an amulet and that amulet can deflect my eye because when my eye goes out, it gets stuck in the amulet, those reshmi, those powers of vision. And what it's called is a sparsha, when the power of vision touches that thing, alters, and then carries the thing back into the individual. So there's kind of an interesting point here that I wanted to get at. I actually figured this out by digging around in the OED when I was first reading this book by Christopher Ferrone. So fascinate, fascinum. You're never going to say something's fascinating again in the same way after this. So in 1591, we have the transitive verb. Transitive verb is something that takes an object. It does something to someone. It doesn't do it itself. It does something to someone. In this earliest version, especially of a snake, to use the eyes or the gaze to deprive prey of the ability to resist and escape. To entrance by a gaze, entering something using your gaze and controlling them, based on how snakes sort of hypnotize creatures. And there's some really great naturalistic nature writing in the 20th century on this very topic about snakes. So in 1766, more generally, to render a person or an animal unable to move. I fascinated him. Unable to move, to escape, or resist. Moving forward, transitive, affecting something. To affect someone or something by sorcery, witchcraft, or enchantment. To put under a spell. Think about that the next time you say, I'm fascinated by this. 1782, another transitive. To capture the imagination or interest of a person. To become extremely interesting or absorbed in. To intrigue. That's our contemporary notion of fascinate. But it gets tricky. In our etymology in the OED, we see that fascinate comes from the Latin fascinat or fascinat, past participle stem, blah, 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 of fascinare. Fascinare means to cast a spell upon, to bewitch. Also, the fascinum spell, witchcraft, of uncertain origin. Classic Latin fascinum may be related to the ancient Greek word that I can't remember here because I can't remember the letters, which means sorcerer. So, fascinate, fascinare, to bewitch someone, casting with visions, the powers of vision to captivate someone. Well, what's a fascinus? I went to Wikipedia and I just checked there because I thought they might have a nice little slapdamn thing right there. Fascinus was thought particularly to ward off evil and the evil eye from children, mainly boys, and from conquering generals. The protective function of the phallus is usually related to the virile and regenerative powers of the erect phallus, though in most cases, the emotion, shame, or laughter created by obscenely looking at someone wearing a dick around their neck is the power that diverts the evil eye. So, in the Latin and Greek world, people would wear amulets to distract from the evil eye that were phalluses, because someone would be jealous and that penis would turn around and fascinate them again, fascinating them so they weren't able to cast the evil eye. To this day in Mediterranean cultures, you still see people wearing a golden horn that is thought to ward off the malak, the person who will make you impotent or steal your fertility. Phallic figures, when you look at them, fascinate you and can prevent the envy of the evil eye being effective. Fascinating, eh? I mean, I remember a folk story, I think it was an anthropology story I read, that of a woman in India who's so worried about the drishti, the evil eye, that she wouldn't even look at her grand aunt or her grand niece. And she was just so worried about the evil eye. When she found herself feeling envious and jealous at the beauty of the child, she turned her eye very quickly and instead looked at a giant stone, and the stone broke apart. In another instance, when you'll see pictures of young South Asian kids, they'll often have a smear on their face. Their parents will put like a little piece of lampblack or coal and smear it on their face so there's a little imperfection. The idea here is that if there's that imperfection in their faces, they won't have people be envious of them and won't catch the evil eye. Or perhaps the child with a smear on their face, or the child with a nickname that means something like vomit or diarrhea, will be, when you call to that beautiful child, hey, diarrhea, come here, the demons around that would become hungry for their very child flesh go, that kid's named Vomit. Who cares? Never mind. So there's a lot going on here, thinking about the ways vision works, the evil eye, and cursing. So one of the important things to remember as we're moving toward the close here is that it's not just the ritual act itself that's effective. Often a divine power is harnessed to make that thing happen. Could be an angel, could be a demon, could be a ghost, could be a daimon. A daimon is a tutelary being. Socrates was said to have his own personal daimon that would speak him wisdom. But it can also be kind of a low-level, just sort of demon, like a demonic figure that could be harnessed in these tablets. Sometimes a cursor would actually offer a gift to that deity. Sometimes the tablets themselves do the power. Sometimes the tablet is deposited in the hand of a corpse. And this suggests that they are drawing upon underworldly gods as opposed to the gods in the heavens. Some tablets have no divine appeal whatsoever, but here they're still appealing to something superhuman. The ritual itself, the power of the rite and the language itself is a superhuman power that affects what is desired. Now, these rituals and curses often bind. We read this one ritual, Malseus, the son of Nichana, or Nichana. His eyes, hands, fingers, arms, nails, hair, head, feet, thigh, belly, buttock, navel, chest, nipples, neck, mouth, cheeks, teeth, lips, chin, eyes, forehead, eyebrows, shoulder blades, shoulders, sinews, bones, medulla, don't know what that is, belly, penis, shin, and all of these things. I bind his business, profits, and health. The victim is thought to be bound to the sense that they cannot exert influence, and naturally failure will come to them. So binding, or katadesmo, as opposed to dedicating, anathema, in this case, I don't even need to make that point. Never mind, I don't like that point anymore. Okay, so what about magic words? We have a phrase that we talked about here called the Voces magicae. It's a Greek phrase, and a great example of it, well, it means like magical words. And generally magical words, when we call them Voces magicae, are thought to be magic words that don't have semantic value. They don't have meaning, but they do work. They somehow are able, by their very presence, by their repetition, by their writing, they do work. But that work is not conveying meaning. It's making a ritual effective or causing a curse. One of the most famous of these magic Voces magicae is hocus pocus. Hocus pocus, boom, rabbit out of the hat. Well, hocus pocus is actually kind of a degeneration or a doggerel of the word hoc est corpus. This is the body. A priest would say that as he gives the sacrament. This is the body of Christ. A priest would say that funny thing that people didn't know, and they kind of thought they heard hocus pocus, and hocus pocus turns into a magical word. Doesn't have any meaning. It doesn't mean this is the body, this is the transmutation of the wafer into the body of God. Also, in modern days, we have abracadabra. Abracadabra, the magic happens. But abracadabra goes way back in the Greek and Latin. These days, contemporary sorcerers in one lineage don't say abracadabra, but say abrahadabra, to sort of regenerate the power of those words that have been taken aside by stage magic. So what's going on in these coefficients of magic? These odd words are scrambled up versions of words, lose semantic value. They don't give meaning. But in that loss, the magic words become more powerful as they become ritual actions themselves. uncluttered by semantic meaning. Remember when Bernd Otto was talking to us about sigils? In a sigil, you'll take the words of what you desire, and then you like mix them all around to make them into a symbol, so they no longer look like those words anymore. You meditate upon that symbol or focus on that symbol, and then discharge energy through that symbol, and it's thought to direct in a non-semantic way your brain to affect the energy to cause that change in the world. So here we have this image. Draw a line linking the individual letters of a word you desire to perform and transform into a sigil. So you would just write all the little letters like, you know, like, I don't know, big money. I'd go B-I-G-M-O-N-E, and then I'd look at that symbol and I'd go, oh, it doesn't say anything anymore. And I'd go, perfect. And I'd pull that image out and I would meditate upon it. So in some ways, by removing clear meaning from words or symbols, we make them more powerful magically. So here we get the coefficients of weirdness that's established by Malinowski, who's a thinker of magic who we haven't really looked at too much, but he's pretty important. So reading here, and I do think the coefficient of weirdness is an important aspect of understanding magic in general. Magic rituals are just kind of weird. I mean, their weirdness kind of is what makes them powerful. The incomprehensible utterances and outlandish names, the strange arrangements of letters and peculiar palindromes, these unusual and abnormal, in a word, magical. The anthropologist Malinowski's concept of a coefficient of weirdness may be useful in this regard. The Voces magicae raise the coefficient of weirdness in a spell, setting it further beyond the bounds of ordinary speech. The speech as speech act becomes more powerful because it doesn't have a specific meaning. The weirdness of the spell has the rhetorical effect of convincing the audience, even if that audience is just the magician himself, or the magician and a client, or even a larger audience, the weirdness convinces people of the extraordinary power of the speech act. This is not just a normal wish expressed in words, but an efficacious one. This is not just an ordinary way of talking to a deity, but a particularly effective one that will do a thing. Yet, with all of this, it can't be so weird that the audience doesn't think, oh, this is a magic ritual that does this. So you can't go so far out that it has no context. But magic tends to get weird. We'll see this more and more. So binding rituals aren't gone. I mean, look at this little spell right here. Magical recipes online. Black salt, earth, fire, grant my wish, use the thing, do the bottle, bind it here. Bind, bind, bind. Okay. So what do I want you to think about this? One, writing. When you write something down on a magic ritual, it's a performative act. When you write it down, it does something. It's more than communicating knowledge to someone by writing it down. The writing of it does something. Expressing the words on the page cause something to happen. It is a performative speech act, or a speech act that is written down, that is made concrete. Now, when we think of names, the name of a person is a symbol of the person. So manipulating the name of the person can manipulate the very body and existence of the person. Now, ritual actions are what I've called, and Tambaya calls, persuasive analogies. So when you scramble and rearrange letters of names, you're scrambling and rearranging the person or the affections of the person. So this is sort of like, you can use different strategies to inscribe the name of a person on a page or their body on a page. And when you do that, it's thought to have an effect. This is thought to be the same in magic as normative causality. So when I'm doing a ritual to make some guy have a headache, it's the same as I punched him in the head. We don't think this way, but the Greeks would have seen it as exactly equivalent. When you're looking at the basic structure of these binding curse tablets, they have three elements. One, a wish for harm, the result that is desired. Two, the target or the victim. And three, a superhuman power, be that a deity, be that a ghost, be that a demon, be that the power of the ritual in and of itself is yoked to the binding powers of this tablet. Remember that these are not illegal or illicit. They're not considered cheating. They're not considered unfair. They were non-normative in the sense that you know, if you really want to win at a chariot, you try to win at a chariot race. But a wise man also does magic, does a non-normative thing to make that victory more possible. So these were legitimate ways to get ahead in the world. And the operators were thinking symbolically, not literally. They weren't literally trying to smash a person's body apart or literally bind them from being able to move, but they were binding their ability to be effective in the world. And binding hasn't gone away. Remember, I talked to you about how there was a tradition, or well, actually, it just happened a few years back, that there was a whole group of occultists that were doing rituals to bind Donald Trump, bind him from having the ability to implement his will upon the country. And at the same time, there were a whole bunch of like occultists who liked Donald Trump who were doing the counter-binding rituals to Trump at the same time. Binding rituals go on. When I first started meeting Wiccans, they were always talking about doing binding rituals. And these binding rituals come kind of out of this Greek style of thinking. For instance, if you take, you know, a former lover who's giving you a hard time and you bury his or her picture under the dirt, you've bound him. It's a common Wiccan ritual that they do. All right. The goal is success on the part of the operator. The rituals are done for greater success in a competitive world. And I would argue, as I always argue, they are effective because they give people more confidence. They give people more ability to feel empowered in the world. In that sense, any ritual is effective as long as it has an effect. Sometimes that effect is just not being in pain due to inertia or frustration. All right, I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.